The doorbell rang before noon, sharp and impatient, slicing through the stillness of a house not yet ready for guests. I had just stepped out of the shower, towel around my head, bathrobe damp against my skin, when I opened the door. And there she was, standing barefoot on my porch, veil pushed back, curls frizzed from humidity, her wedding dress wrinkled and sagging slightly on one side. Her eyes were red, not from joy, but from something heavier, something left unspoken. One strap of her dress had slipped down her arm, exposing the curve of her shoulder, delicate and trembling. She didn't smile. She didn't greet me. She just walked inside, holding the hem of her gown as if it were a burden, not a dream. The smell of vanilla candles still lingered in the air from the night before, the kind I lit to calm my nerves. The house looked like a holding room for something sacred, white ribbons on the stair banister, gift bags waiting by the door, champagne flutes in the sink. She moved through it all like a ghost, barefoot on the hardwood floor, the fabric of her dress whispering against her legs with every step. Her presence felt unreal, as if the weight of the dress itself made her float. I followed her, silent, the sound of her walking loud against my heartbeat. She didn't stop until she reached my bedroom. I closed the door behind us and stood there for a moment, frozen by the intimacy of her choice. My room wasn't clean. A sweater I had tossed aside lay crumpled on the chair. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled and still warm from where I had been sitting earlier with a cup of tea. She went straight to the edge of the bed and stood there with her back to me. The zipper on the dress was half down, and I could see the faint sheen of sweat along her spine, the soft rise and fall of her breathing. I didn't ask why she came. I didn't ask what she needed. I just stepped forward and reached for the zipper. My fingers trembled slightly as they touched the cold metal. The zipper moved easily, like it had been waiting. The dress peeled open in slow motion, revealing smooth skin, the gentle slope of her back, the curve just above her waist. I felt like I was trespassing, like I had walked into someone else's dream but couldn't find the way out. She held her arms at her sides, not helping, not resisting. The dress slid down past her hips, pooling around her ankles in a quiet, expensive sigh. She stood there in just her lingerie, white, thin, and far too intimate for a woman who was supposed to wear it for someone else. I couldn't look away. The pale strap of her bra curved along her shoulder like a line drawn in breath. There was something raw about her body in that moment, not posed, not styled, just there, real, vulnerable, and heartbreakingly still. She turned slightly, just enough for me to see the edge of her face, but not her eyes. Her lip quivered like she was about to speak, but no words came. She simply stepped out of the dress and left it behind on the floor like a shed skin. I stared at it, white and folded in on itself, and felt a strange sense of mourning. She sat on the edge of my bed, knees drawn together, hands resting lightly in her lap. Her shoulders were bare, her back straight, but something about her posture was collapsing. I stayed standing, unsure of the rules now. Everything felt suspended, like the air had thickened, like time had paused between what we had always been and what we might now become. I felt the urge to touch her shoulder, to offer her a blanket, to do anything except stand there silently. But I didn't move. I didn't know how to move. The room was too quiet. Outside, a bird chirped once and flew away. I could hear the soft ticking of the clock on my dresser, the rhythmic thud of my own pulse in my ears. She sighed, barely audible, and leaned back slightly, resting her weight on her arms behind her. Her torso stretched, her chest rose, and I felt heat bloom across my skin, as if the air between us had caught fire without a spark. I sat down beside her slowly, careful not to let our bodies touch, but the space between us felt like it was shrinking by the second. I didn't ask why she had come to me instead of her groom. I didn't ask if she planned to go back. All I knew was that she had chosen my doorstep, my hands, my presence. I could feel the gravity of her unraveling, the quiet collapse beneath the surface. She had always been composed, poised, the kind of woman who made others orbit her. But now she sat next to me in silence, stripped of expectation and ceremony, and all I could see was her fragility. It called to something inside me, something I had kept buried under years of control. I looked at her hands, long fingers, a delicate ring, perfect nails. They were trembling slightly, despite her stillness. I wanted to take them in mine, but I didn't. I just stared. The hem of her slip rode up slightly above her thighs, and her skin looked impossibly soft in the filtered daylight. I felt the room tilt. My body was betraying me, reacting in ways I didn't allow it to. Not for her, not today. And yet, I couldn't breathe right. The scent of her perfume, something floral and sweet, drifted between us and wrapped itself around my thoughts like smoke. She tilted her head back and closed her eyes, exposing her neck, vulnerable and pale. I watched the small pulse in her throat flutter like a trapped bird. I wondered if she could hear my breathing, how uneven it had become. My robe had slipped open slightly, the tie loose around my waist, and I became aware of how exposed I was, how ridiculous I must have looked next to her ethereal elegance. But she didn't open her eyes. She just breathed, and I mirrored her, as if following her rhythm might give me clarity. The silence between us deepened. It wasn't awkward, it was electric. Every second stretched longer, as though the house was holding its breath. I could still hear the ticking clock, but now it felt like a countdown. To what? I didn't know. All I knew was that she had come here when she didn't have to, that she had taken off her dress in my room, not hers, that she had let herself fall apart next to me, and something inside me shifted, quietly but irrevocably. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know what she would ask of me, or what I would be willing to give. But I knew this wasn't just about a zipper, or a dress, or a wedding. It was about something older, deeper, something waiting. She sat on the edge of my bed in silence, her back slightly hunched, her spine curved like a question mark drawn in breath. Her skin was bare from the shoulder blades down, soft and golden in the dim light that filtered through the curtains. Her bra straps rested delicately against her shoulders, the lace fine and nearly translucent. I couldn't stop looking at the way it clung to her, not in a vulgar way, but as if it belonged there, like it was a part of her skin. The intimacy of her presence, in that state of undress, unraveled something in me that I had kept folded for years. I moved closer, not touching her yet, just settling beside her in a careful hush. The air felt heavy, scented with her perfume and something warmer, more personal. My robe brushed against her thigh, and I felt her body shift slightly, acknowledging the contact without resistance. I could hear her breathing, slow, uneven, shallow at first, then gradually deeper, like she was settling into the moment. My own breath tried to match hers, but it kept faltering. The nearness was disorienting, electric in its restraint. Her hair was still pinned, but strands had fallen loose, framing her neck in curls. I reached out slowly, brushing one lock back behind her ear, letting my fingers graze her skin for just a second longer than necessary. She didn't move. I could feel the pulse under her jaw, a small flutter that told me she was not as calm as she appeared. I let my hand trail down, lightly, along the line of her shoulder. Her skin was warm, firm, and smooth beneath my fingertips, and I suddenly felt aware of every cell in my body. She leaned back onto her hands, arching her chest forward in a movement that seemed unconscious but deliberate. The lace of her bra stretched softly over her breasts, the fabric delicate, her nipples barely visible through the sheer material. I couldn't look away. There was something sacred in the way she allowed herself to be seen, without flinching, without apology. I reached up and let my thumb trace the edge of the lace just above her heart, my hand trembling as it hovered there. Her breathing changed, slower now, heavier. She turned her head slightly, exposing the slope of her neck, inviting without words. I bent forward and let my lips touch the space just below her ear. Her skin tasted like salt and skin and something floral. She tilted her head in response, giving me more. My mouth explored slowly, her neck, her collarbone, the edge of her bra. My hands moved to her waist, holding her with the reverence I didn't know I had inside me. She lay back on the bed, pulling me with her, not with force, but with gravity. I followed, sliding beside her, letting our bodies align naturally. Her legs brushed mine, bare skin on bare skin, soft friction that set my nerves alight. The lace of her bra pressed against my chest, and I felt the heat of her body radiate into mine. My hands traced her curves slowly, from the dip of her waist to the soft rise of her stomach to the place where her panties hugged her hips. I kissed her chest, gently, just above the lace, and then lower. My fingers moved behind her back, unclasping the bra without haste. The straps slid off her shoulders like silk slipping off a statue. When I pulled the fabric away, her breasts were revealed in the soft light, full and perfect, rising and falling with each breath. I cupped them carefully, brushing my thumbs over her nipples, watching her arch into the touch with a soft, voiceless sigh. She reached up and touched my face, not to guide me, but to ground me. Her fingers moved through my hair, and I kissed her breasts, first one, then the other, tongue flicking lightly, mouth warm and reverent. Her body responded with a subtle tension, a quiet gasp that slipped past her lips. I moved lower, trailing kisses down her belly, tracing the path of her breath, tasting the heat of her skin. She trembled slightly beneath my mouth, and I could feel her anticipation in the way her legs shifted, knees bending, thighs parting just enough. I paused, looking at her face. Her eyes were closed, lashes resting on flushed cheeks. Her mouth was open slightly, a breath caught between desire and surrender. I pulled down her panties slowly, inch by inch, revealing more of her, letting her breathe through the unraveling. The fabric slid down her thighs, and I tossed it aside, focusing now on her body, naked, warm, inviting. I kissed the inside of her thigh, then again, higher. Her skin was soft, sensitive, and the closer I came to the center of her, the more I could feel the heat radiating from her core. I pressed my mouth to her, gently at first, letting her adjust to the sensation. She let out a low, breathy moan, one hand gripping the sheet, the other clutching my shoulder. My tongue moved slowly, in delicate circles, teasing her, tasting her. Her hips responded instinctively, pressing into me, seeking more. I gave it to her, increasing the rhythm, the pressure, reading her body as it tensed, shuddered, surrendered. Her breath became uneven, broken, and when she came, it was with a silent cry and a full body tremble that ran through me like thunder. I stayed there for a moment, holding her thighs gently, letting her come down slowly, her muscles twitching beneath my hands. Then I crawled up her body, kissing the trail I had taken downward, retracing it in reverse. Her skin was slick, her pulse still racing. I settled beside her, gathering her into my arms, feeling the way she curled into me like we had done this 1,000 times before. She rested her head on my chest, her breathing returning to normal, her body softening against mine like warm clay. I held her quietly, running my fingers down her back, memorizing the pattern of her spine, the subtle weight of her leg draped over mine. The room was quiet again, but the air was thick with everything we hadn't said. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to speak. Her body against mine was the only truth I trusted. And in that stillness, in that perfect silence, I knew something irreversible had just taken place. She wasn't just a bride anymore, and I wasn't just the woman who helped her out of her dress. There was no name for what had happened between us, but it had shape and breath and lace and heat, and it had just begun. The morning after didn't arrive with guilt. It came slowly, like warm light through sheer curtains, brushing against our bare skin. I lay there beside her, still caught in the echo of her breath against my collarbone, her leg draped over mine, as if we had always slept this way. The sheets smelled like us, salt and sweat, her perfume still lingering, my skin humming with aftershocks. Her fingers twitched lightly in her sleep, her body half curled into mine, and I watched her in silence, unsure of whether I was savoring or mourning the stillness. Something fundamental had shifted. I didn't know what to call it, but I felt the border between what was acceptable and what was real dissolve quietly in the night. Her presence was still beautiful, still soft, but it carried new weight. The shape of her body wasn't just familiar now. It was imprinted on me, remembered by my hands, my mouth, my hips. I closed my eyes, trying to hold on to the sensation without being crushed by it. It was too much and not enough at the same time. She stirred before I was ready. A stretch, a sigh, the subtle shifting of muscle and breath. Her arm slid across my stomach, and I felt her fingers skim my side before she pulled away, slowly, carefully, as if she didn't want to break the spell too fast. I remained still, pretending sleep, unable to face the inevitable clarity that would come with her gaze. The silence became something dense between us. Not awkward, not yet, but charged, like a question left unanswered too long. She sat up and wrapped the sheet around her, the same one that had covered both our bodies hours ago. It draped over her shoulders like a borrowed truth. I opened my eyes and watched her back, smooth, curved, alive with motion. I wanted to reach out, to place my palm against her spine and hold her there, keep her from vanishing into reality. But I didn't. I let her stand. Her body moved with the grace of someone still half dreaming, but I could feel the distance already forming between us. I sat up slowly, the sheets sliding from my body, cool air rushing over skin that had only known warmth hours ago. My thighs ached in a quiet, satisfied way. My lips were still swollen from her kisses, and my hair tangled from her fingers. I could feel where she had left me open, still slightly pulsing, still raw in the best possible way. But the room had changed. The walls felt closer, the light less forgiving. Everything we had done still hung in the air, but now it trembled under the weight of reality. She didn't look at me when she crossed the room. She moved toward her dress, the one she had stepped out of the night before, now lying crumpled on the floor like a discarded skin. Her hands reached for it, paused, and then withdrew. Instead, she walked to the window and stood there, backlit and quiet, watching something only she could see. I stared at her silhouette, memorizing the curve of her shoulder, the slope of her hip, the slight tension in her neck. She looked like a painting unfinished, the kind that leaves you aching. I rose, wrapping myself in my robe, the fabric clinging to skin still warm from her touch. I walked toward her, unsure if my steps would close the space or make it wider. When I reached her, I stood close enough to feel the heat radiating from her, but not close enough to touch. She didn't turn. I didn't speak. We simply stood there, two women on the edge of something too vast to name, staring into a morning that refused to offer answers. Everything I had believed about my life, the borders, the rules, the definitions, had begun to blur. She was engaged. Tomorrow, she would marry someone else. Last night shouldn't have happened. And yet, my body betrayed no regret. Only need. Only memory. Only the ache of something that felt truer than anything I'd allowed myself to feel in years. I thought about the zipper, how it all began with a simple motion, fingers on metal, the sound of fabric separating. But it wasn't the zipper that undid us. It was everything that followed. The breaths, the touches, the silences. The way she had looked at me when her body opened. The way I had tasted her name without saying it. The way she had given herself, not in pieces, but in totality. She finally turned to face me. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes held mine without flinching. And for a moment, I saw it again. The same electricity, the same pull, the same tremor beneath the skin. But it was quieter now, more buried. She wrapped the sheet tighter around herself and walked past me, brushing my arm as she passed. I stood there, watching the imprint of her steps in the carpet, wondering if that was the last time I'd feel her so close. I returned to the bed and sat down, suddenly overwhelmed by the mess we'd made. The sheets twisted, the pillows displaced, her bra hanging off the nightstand. Evidence of something sacred, something forbidden. I traced the edge of the sheet with my fingertip, thinking about the rules we had just broken, and whether I had ever truly believed in them. My heartbeat was slow now, but heavy, weighted by everything that felt like truth, even if the world said it was wrong. Rightness, I realized, wasn't about morality. It wasn't about commitment or tradition or promises made in churches. It was about breath and body, and the kind of intimacy that opens you from the inside. And whatever name this would be given, if any, it had happened. It had lived. It had changed me. There was no undoing that now. The day unfolded slowly, as if time itself hesitated to move forward. The morning light stretched long shadows across the hardwood floors, and I moved through the house in a fog, performing tasks that had no weight. I poured coffee I didn't drink, straightened throw pillows no one would sit on, and avoided every mirror. She had left only hours earlier, her presence still clinging to the air like the scent of perfume. The sheets on my bed were still warm, still creased with the shape of her body. I didn't dare touch them. There was no message, no knock on the door, but I knew she would return. Not because of love, not because of guilt, but because something unfinished hung in the silence between us. When she arrived, it was late afternoon. The sun had shifted, casting a soft gold over everything, and she stepped inside like she had done it 1,000 times before. This time, though, she was dressed simply, no lace, no ceremony, no veil to hide behind. She looked smaller without it all, more human, and yet, somehow, even further away. We didn't speak, but our eyes met. There was no shame in hers, only distance. She walked to the kitchen, took a glass from the cupboard, and filled it with water like she belonged here, like last night had been part of a routine, not a rupture. I sat on the couch, legs curled under me, heartbeat loud in my ears. Every breath I took was carefully measured, as though making any sudden move would cause the memory of her to vanish. She joined me a few minutes later, sitting close but not touching. Her presence was familiar now, but sharp around the edges. She told me, in her silence, that the wedding would still happen, not through words, but in the way she held her body, upright, contained, already prepared to re-enter the world she had tried to escape. There was a shift in her posture, something subtle but irreversible. She was returning to the role she had rehearsed for so long. Last night had been an intermission, not a rewrite. I knew it the moment she looked past me instead of at me. The part of her that had reached for me in the dark was already retreating. I stood and walked to the window, needing space, but there was none in the room. The walls closed in, lined with reminders of what she was about to do. A gift bag on the dining table, a white hair comb resting on the bookshelf, her dress now folded neatly in the spare room. She hadn't taken it with her. That alone said more than anything she could have told me. It was as if she had left a piece of herself behind on purpose, a piece she wasn't allowed to bring to the altar. She followed me, slower this time, and stood close enough for our shoulders to brush. I didn't move. I couldn't. Her presence was unbearable and essential all at once. She touched my hand gently, the kind of touch people mistake for comfort, but I felt the tremble beneath it. Not weakness, not doubt, something else, something like grief, as if she were mourning the version of herself that bloomed only in my bed, only in my arms, only in the space between midnight and morning. I turned to face her, finally, unsure if my expression gave away everything I had tried to hide. She looked at me with eyes that no longer asked for permission. Instead, they offered apology, wrapped in resignation. She lifted her hand to my cheek for just a moment, then let it fall, as if even that small tenderness cost too much. I nodded, not because I understood, but because there was nothing else to do. There was no place left for anger, only ache. When she walked away, she didn't look back. I listened to the door close behind her, the soft click of a final choice. I remained still, eyes on the empty space where she had just stood. The air no longer felt alive. It was flat now, stale with loss. My hands curled into fists, not from rage, but to keep myself from reaching for a ghost. She had come not to return, but to make sure I understood she couldn't. Later that evening, I opened the closet and found her perfume bottle on the shelf. Small, half full, the scent still clinging to the cap. I held it close to my nose, breathing her in one last time, before placing it gently in a drawer I didn't plan to open again. I stripped the bed, carefully folding the sheets and setting them aside. Her imprint had faded, but my skin still carried her warmth. I undressed in silence, stood before the mirror, and searched my reflection for the woman I had been before her. She wasn't there. That night, I lay in the dark with the window open, listening to the breeze rustle the trees outside. Somewhere, not far away, she was slipping into a white dress again. Somewhere, someone else was waiting at the altar. And somewhere deep inside me, something fragile had been broken open, allowed to exist for a breath, and then buried without a name. She was not my enemy, but she had never been mine. The morning arrived without color. Everything felt washed out, like the world had been reduced to a single muted tone. I moved through my house as if rehearsing for a performance I wasn't in, touching objects I didn't recognize as mine. The dress I had planned to wear hung untouched on the back of the door, its soft beige fabric limp and creased from waiting too long. I made coffee, but it sat cold in the mug, untouched. The house was silent, but my mind roared, filled with a loop of images I couldn't escape. Her skin under my hands, her breath against my neck, her silence as she walked away. I arrived late, intentionally, hoping to avoid the procession of joy. I parked down the street from the church, far enough not to be seen, but close enough to watch. The sun was too bright. It cast hard shadows on the pavement, cruelly indifferent to what was unraveling inside me. My hands gripped the steering wheel, even after I turned off the engine, knuckles white, muscles stiff. I watched people file in, dressed in pastels and polished shoes, their faces lit with expectation. They were there to witness a promise, but none of them knew what had already been broken. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat in silence, watching the open doors of the church swallow people whole. Someone held the veil for her as she stepped out of the car, graceful, poised, beautiful in a way that felt like a knife. Her dress was different from the one she had worn in my bedroom. This one was pristine, tighter at the waist, designed for the photos. She smiled at the crowd, at the cameras, at the man who waited for her under the archway of flowers. And for a brief, bitter second, I wondered if he would ever know who she had been the night before. I left before the vows. I couldn't bear the sound of her voice saying forever to someone else. I walked aimlessly through side streets, shoes pinching, dress sticking to my back. Everything around me blurred into repetition: white roses, folding chairs, polite clapping. I imagined her lips shaping promises with the same mouth that had whispered into my skin. I imagined his hands on her waist, where mine had been just hours ago. And all I could feel was absence, a hollowing out of something I hadn't yet named, but already missed like breath. By the time I got home, the air inside felt colder, as if the walls had absorbed my loss and reflected it back at me. I peeled off my dress and let it fall to the floor, stepping over it like it was just another lie I no longer needed to wear. The mirror in the hallway caught my reflection, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were too empty, her shoulders too still. She looked like someone who had been left behind in a story she never agreed to be part of. I sat on the floor with my knees drawn to my chest and tried to remember the sound of her laugh, not the one she gave to the crowd, but the one that slipped out in the dark, tangled in sheets, breathless and real. That laugh didn't belong to the woman in white who had just said "I do." It belonged to the girl who had trembled beneath my fingers, who had buried her face in my neck like it was the only safe place in the world. That girl was gone now. Replaced, rewritten, lost to tradition and family and the crushing weight of expectation. I stayed on the floor until the shadows stretched long across the room. I didn't turn on the lights. I let the dark settle around me like a second skin. I didn't want to mark the end of the day. I didn't want to close the chapter. The truth was, the day had never truly begun. It wasn't my day. It never had been. It was hers. But I had lived inside its margins, in the quiet in between, where no cameras reached and no vows could touch. Later, I climbed into bed without changing the sheets. Her scent was gone, but I still felt the imprint of her weight in the mattress. I turned to the side where she had once lain, pressing my face to the pillow as if it could still hold her warmth. My fingers curled around the edge of the blanket, and I whispered her name once into the quiet, not expecting it to echo. The room held its breath, and so did I. Outside, somewhere, music played, glasses clinked, people danced in celebration of a love that looked so clean, so simple, so public. But I knew different. I had seen the truth beneath the lace and the makeup. I had held the version of her that trembled, that gasped, that came undone. And even if she buried that part of herself in silk and gold, I would carry it in my skin forever. That was the day that didn't happen, the one no one would remember, but I would never forget. Not because of what was said in front of the altar, but because of what was breathed between shadows the night before. The day the world cheered for a bride, and I mourned the one I had held. It was a Tuesday when she came back. Not with an apology, not with regret, not even with hesitation. She stood at my door with a bakery box in her hands and a practiced smile on her lips, the kind people wear when they're trying too hard to appear casual. Her hair was pulled back the way it had been the day of the ceremony, sleek and neat, No trace of the woman who once stayed up late with me, laughing softly in the quiet of my room. She said nothing at first, just lifted the box slightly like an offering, like a peace treaty disguised as dessert. Inside was a slice of wedding cake, ivory frosting piped into little swirls, pale pink flowers sculpted from sugar, the edges too perfect to be honest. She placed it on my kitchen counter like it meant nothing, like it was just excess, not evidence. I stared at it for too long. The white of the frosting reminded me of bedsheets. Her voice, when she finally spoke, didn't match the memory I had of it moaning against my collarbone. It was lighter, controlled, like she'd rehearsed whatever it was she'd come here to say. But I wasn't listening. I was looking at her mouth. She talked about the wedding, about how beautiful everything had turned out, how everyone cried at the vows. I nodded, as if I hadn't watched her walk toward him in a dress that wasn't mine, carrying a heart that had once trembled for me. She laughed once, a short sound that didn't reach her eyes, and I knew she wasn't here to relive anything. She was here to bury it, and she'd brought sugar to mask the taste. I made tea. We didn't drink. She sat at the table, arms crossed loosely, watching me with a kind of distant fondness, like someone watching a place they used to live in. I could feel her scanning the apartment for remnants of herself, checking corners for shadows of what we'd done. But I had cleaned, scrubbed every surface, folded the sheets, washed the glass her lips had touched, burned the candle she'd left behind, and yet her presence still peeled the paint from the walls. She said she found something while unpacking, reached into her purse and pulled out a small white square of fabric, my underwear, twisted and forgotten under the edge of her bed that morning after. She held it by the corner, delicate and deliberate, like she didn't want to touch it too much. Her eyes met mine, no smile, no accusation, just acknowledgement. She placed it on the table beside the cake, the two things side by side, ridiculous in their symbolism. A slice of celebration, a strip of memory. I stared at them both like they were museum exhibits. She mentioned therapy, said it softly, like confession, like penance. I didn't ask who suggested it, her or her husband. Maybe both. Maybe it was damage control. Maybe it was the only way to explain why her body had responded to mine more honestly than it ever had to his. She said it as if it were closure, as if naming it made it something clinical, a mistake to be processed, not a truth to be lived. I nodded again, this time to end the conversation, not to agree. I opened the box and took a fork to the cake, cut a neat bite. Frosting curled against the tines, cream filling oozing just slightly at the edges. I brought it to my mouth and tasted her all over again, not in flavor, but in memory. The sweetness was artificial, a layer hiding something bland. I chewed slowly, watching her watch me, wondering if she understood what I was doing, if she knew that swallowing that bite was the closest I'd come to swallowing the past. She didn't touch the cake. She stood after a few minutes, smoothing her dress, gathering her bag, as if nothing else needed to be said. Her eyes swept the room one last time, and I wondered if she was looking for the girl she left behind, or maybe checking that I hadn't become her. As she walked toward the door, her perfume trailed behind her, faint now, but unmistakable. It clung to my curtains long after she was gone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat at the table, took another bite of the cake, and let it sit on my tongue until it turned bitter. My fingers touched the fabric she had returned, and for a moment I pressed it to my cheek like a wound. It still smelled faintly like her, like skin and heat and something unspoken. I didn't throw it away. I didn't fold it. I left it on the table, beside the half-eaten cake, like an altar to a truth too fleeting to live and too heavy to forget. Later that night, I lay on the couch, body curled into itself, stomach slightly aching from sugar and memory. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars passed, televisions glowed behind curtains, lives continued in their quiet, structured rhythms. But inside me, everything had come undone. I had touched something real, only to watch it vanish under layers of frosting and silk. She brought me a cake meant to say goodbye, but all I could taste was her mouth.